Hi, thank you for joining me for today for the Teen Anxiety Maze. I am talking to you about a book today that, well, I'm always reading books about anxiety and I get so excited about the new things that I'm learning. And usually I have the paper book because I'd love to write in books and, make notes or draw arrows or circle things that I want to talk about. But this time I'm reading it on Kindle and I'm also listening to it. And I love getting stuff from the library and I can get the audiobook and the Kindle version from the library many times and I listen to it when I'm driving around and then I come back to the paper or to the digital version and I look for the things that you can highlight in a Kindle, which is really fun. And just FYI about getting books on your Kindle from your library, even if you've had it too long and it goes back and it gets returned, when you get it back, when you download it to your device again, all of your highlights and notes and things that you made is still there. So just in case you are interested in any of that. But I'm learning some really good things. And, of course, the book is just on. And I actually haven't even finished it because there's just so many good things. But there was some stuff that I just really kind of wanted to summarize for you, that some of it fits with my program and what I'm already doing. And again, I'm always so excited that it just sort of reaffirms that what I'm doing is good and what I need to be doing. But there were some things that he's mentioning that I want to focus more on and haven't focused on as much. So I want to talk to you about that today. So the book, I showed it to you, but the book is Anxiety RX, and it's by Dr. Russell Kennedy. And so he is a medical doctor, and he actually experienced anxiety so terrible. And he's just talks about the whole process that he went through to finally get some relief and to be able to manage it. And so the things that he found for himself, I think will be helpful to a lot of people. So when he was talking about where does anxiety come from, I know there was a episode where I talked about amygdala-based anxiety and that every human has anxiety because our thoughts create anxiety and our thoughts tell us all the bad things that are going to happen. He has the 3 W's: the worries, the what ifs, and worst case scenarios. And so everybody has that. It isn't a disease or a problem. It's just the way things are. But some people, and I remember talking about this in a different episode, that some people have amygdala-based anxiety, and not everyone has that kind. And that's the kind that kind of catches you out of nowhere, where you think things are fine, and all of a sudden you're in a panic attack, or all of a sudden you are very anxious and you don't know why, because there isn't a trigger or you didn't have a thought that then created that feeling. It just comes on. And I talked to you about how the amygdala has its own memories, and those memories can be from when we were a baby or maybe even before we were born, though that's kind of tricky. And if you think about trauma, and I know I haven't talked a ton about trauma on here, but if you know some things about trauma, there is generational trauma, which you can get trauma from your ancestors. And so I think this is playing a piece of that. But he says that when we experience trauma that's too big for our mind to handle, and this is especially when we're little, babies and toddlers, and probably even into high school times, and I'm sure if you have PTSD from something, they're talking about that too. But anytime we experience trauma that our brain cannot handle or process, it gets offloaded into our body as alarm. And he says, think about this as if your feelings are getting buried in your body because they're too much. And so we don't know they're there necessarily because they've been buried down. And then something can happen. We smell a smell that reminds us of that, or we hear something, or we see something, or we have some kind of a trigger that reminds us of what that is. And then our body will respond in an alarmed way, in that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, when we don't know why, because we aren't associating that smell or that situation with the trauma because we don't remember it, maybe. So alarms happen to us, or those alarms come from, and this is I can't even think of the word right now. I can't believe I didn't write it down because I didn't think I would forget it. But you take the letters of alarms, and that spells out what these different traumas are that can create the alarms. So abuse, loss, abandonment, rejection, being forced to mature too early, or feeling shame. Now, when I read this list, I feel like that's practically, we could all experience those things. And he did say in another book I'm listening to about trauma is saying the same thing, that everyone experiences trauma. Now, if you go back and listen to my really early episodes, I talk about ACEs, which is the adverse childhood experiences. And when I went through the whole list of those things, when I think about my own life, I would score from those 10 things, I would score it as a 0. And yet I know I have traumas from my childhood for different reasons. And so when I look at this list, like rejection, being forced to mature too early, or feeling shame, I have those kinds of things from my childhood that are causing traumas and alarms inside my body. So I just wanted you to know about that. We have kind of talked about amygdala-based anxiety, and that's kind of what we're talking about here too, or what he's talking about here too. So anxiety has 2 parts to it, and we've kind of talked about this before too, but we have the mind part of anxiety and we have the body part of anxiety. And the mind, of course, thinks the anxiety, and that's that thought-based anxiety that every single human has. And then the body feels that anxiety. And so when we're thinking things, that those worries, what ifs, and worst case scenarios, our body reacts to that because it's imagining that those things are happening or imagining that they will happen. And so our body responds to that. So to heal your anxiety, we actually need to separate the mind and the body. And that this is the part I really was an eye-opener for me, or like a mind-blowing thought. Instead of trying to fix anxiety by changing our thoughts, we should start by working with our body. And that's one piece in my program. Like, I start with the thoughts and then we move into the body. But this book has made me think that maybe I should start in the body and then we can move to the thoughts. Now, he says that thought work is really important, but if you only do thought work and you don't deal with how your body feels, you won't heal. And I think that's so true. And I already do talk to my clients about processing emotions and allowing anxiety to be in their bodies. But he kind of goes a few steps further. So it will be interesting for you to read the whole thing if you want to know all the specifics of that. But I just want you to think about the idea that we need to start working in our body to feel and manage those feelings, and then we can work on the thoughts. So he describes worry as a distraction. So when our body feels alarmed and we're getting that fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, our brain wants to explain why that's happening. And so then the brain starts worrying to distract us from those uncomfortable feelings. Now, we've been talking about that since the beginning of this podcast, that people don't want to feel uncomfortable for whatever reason. Anxiety and fear or panic are just some of those. We don't want to feel angry. We don't want to feel sad. We don't want to feel lonely. We don't want to feel bored. Anything that feels uncomfortable in our body, we don't want to feel it. Our brain wants to do away with it. And before, I talked about that's why we overeat. That's why we take drugs. That's why we drink alcohol. That's why we are addicted to shopping or pornography or all these things, because we don't want to feel these uncomfortable things. So we do things to distract ourselves from it. And so he is saying that worrying is just our brain trying to explain these alarmed feelings. And so it makes up a bunch of stories about why we feel alarmed. And so worry feels useful, but it's just a distraction from what we're feeling in our body. So if we stay in our body and we don't go into our thoughts, and there's some tricks to that he teaches, but if you stay in your body and you feel the feelings, which I teach in my program, then and not get into that thought area, then you can actually calm your body down during that alarmed state. One of the things that he talked about is that these worries that we have that are trying to distract us, he calls those brain droppings. And if you think about animal droppings, that's their poop when they are going around in nature. And so this is like the poop of your brain. Like this is just stuff that your brain makes up that it thinks is maybe trying to help you by explaining away your alarmed feeling, but really it's just causing it to get worse. So you need to learn to feel rather than to think. So you're going to get in your body and you're going to feel what that feels like. And he calls that sensation without explanation. So you are going to feel those feelings wherever they are, and everyone's anxious feelings feel differently in different parts of their body, but you're just going to feel into it. You're going to allow it to be there and just feel it, but you're not going to go up into your brain to try to think of thoughts that are going to explain it away. You're just going to just feel and not think. And one of the things he said in the book was feeling is unavoidable. We can't take this alarm system out of our body. And I've talked to you about that before too, that this is a survival mechanism inside of us that we can't turn off. But he said, so the feeling is unavoidable, but adding thoughts is optional. And those thoughts actually fuel and make it worse. So if you can feel it and just stay in your body and just allow it to be there, it will flow through your body. And the thoughts then don't get mixed up and make it worse. So when you think about those alarms that we were talking about, the abuse, the loss, the rejection, all of those things, a lot of that stuff happens when we're little, when we don't have any power ourselves. Like adults are having power over us, and we didn't have any control over whether a lot of those things happen. And some of those things were accidents and diseases and things that nobody has any control over. And when you're thinking about, since that happened, a lot of those things happen when you were a child, it's coming from that alarm feeling in your body is coming from that child that you were feeling not safe and not protected. And so he has another acronym, that's the word I was looking for earlier, for the word should. So what you should do when you feel this alarm. So you should, S is see the feeling. Then you should hear what it might be telling you. So when you see that in your body and you feel it in your body, what do you think that feeling is saying? And you can really think about it as an entity. What is it telling you? Open up to it instead of pushing it away, because we're allowing it, and we're just going to relax into it and allow it to be in our body. Then we're going to understand the child in you who feels alarmed. So there's a whole thing where you can do inner child work and stuff, and I don't know anything about that. I haven't been trained in it, though I'm very fascinated by it. But just think about yourself as a child, maybe a toddler, something that you don't remember, and that person is still inside of you and they feel scared. And how would you treat a child, a toddler, a baby who is scared? You're going to comfort it and you're going to love it and you're going to help it get through that feeling. So you're going to love yourself through it, which is what you would do to a child, and then defend your inner child instead of judging or blaming yourself. So be saying things like, of course you feel anxious. Remember when we talked about that we are going to expect to be anxious when things are new or different or we're uncertain. And so that, of course, you feel anxious. Of course, this is happening. That's like reassuring that child you, that of course you feel anxious. That is normal. That's what happens in these situations. So when you give that alarm system inside your body attention and care, you start to allow it to go away. You start to allow to ease it. And that's how you're going to manage that feeling. And once you've managed that feeling, the thoughts are going to probably automatically go away to some extent, because if your body's not experiencing alarmed feelings, it's not going to make up thoughts to help explain it. He talks a lot about using breath. And again, we've talked about that too, because we need to calm our body. And we're not going to do that by thinking. We're going to do that by doing things that help our body to calm itself. And breath is something that everybody has access to. Now, we don't always think about our breath because it just happens. Like, that's just part of being human again. But we can be intentional and do certain things with our breath that are helpful to calm ourselves down. So when we breathe deeply and slowly, our body feels safe. So if we're taking deeper, slower breaths, it cues our mind and it cues our body to, I am safe. And because if you're not safe, you know you're not breathing deeply and slowly. You know, I think I originally had a Fitbit and now I have a smartwatch. And many times my Fitbit for sure, and sometimes my smartwatch, thinks that I took a nap when really I'm just watching something or just relaxing. And I think it's so funny that obviously my body is so relaxed that it thinks it's sleeping. So think about that deeply and slowly is what it's like when you're sleeping. And that cues your body that you're safe. And so if you feel some anxiety coming on, notice your breath, because how are you breathing? And just slow it down, make it deeper and calmer. And that's automatically going to calm your body down and then your brain down. Then he talked about some other kind of grounding techniques. And one of them that I like that I haven't used, like putting your hand on your heart or putting your hand where your breath is. In my program, we do welcoming breath, where you breathe in and you imagine that your breath is going to the areas that hurt or are bothering you. And then you imagine that your breath is healing that area, and then you breathe out. And he says to just place your hand over your heart. If you don't know, really, you can't really pinpoint where the anxiety feeling is. Or if you do know where the feeling is, then put your hand wherever that is. But I'm just going to put it on my heart. But when you're taking those deep breaths and you have your hand on your heart or wherever it is hurting you or uncomfortable, then you say, I am safe in this moment. Because even if you're worried about something that is unsafe at some point, almost always, like 100% of your thinking, you're safe right then. I'm safe in this second. I'm safe right now. And so if something that you're thinking about in the future that might be unsafe, just take deep breaths and say, I am safe in this moment. And that will ground you into the present time, which is where, when you're in the present time, it's really hard to be anxious, because anxiety has to do with past things and future things. It's not about right now. Almost always, it's not about right now. And then just putting love into yourself. Just putting that hand on your heart feels like a loving gesture. You're putting love and compassion into yourself. And keep thinking about that small child that was you, that is feeling scared or sad, and maybe something happened to that small child. Maybe it's something you know about, maybe it's something you don't know about. And so you're just loving that small child inside and saying it's okay, and I'm here, and I'm here to love you and support you. So Dr. Kennedy also gives a practical tool that he uses the letters A, B, C, D, E. And A is awareness and acceptance, and that's just noticing that feeling. So he starts with how do you feel in your body? And then he does the body and breath work. So that's the B, and that's you just focus on the breathing. And then C is connection. So that's connecting with yourself, that loving, compassionate to yourself, but also you might connect with other people who can support you, friends, family, other adults who can help you. That's kind of where I come in sometimes. Discipline, which means to keep practicing the skills. So that's sometimes many of my clients say, well, all this sounds fine, but it doesn't work. And usually when I say, well, let's talk about how often you've practiced it, they don't do that very often. You've got to practice things to become good at them. So you need to practice when you're not feeling alarms and anxiety, where you're just like having a pretty good day, but you go ahead and practice the breathing or practice loving yourself. And then the ego is the E, and that just means that the ego is your brain, and it's going to try to take over with the worrying and try to tell you all those worries, what ifs, and worst case scenarios. Just be aware of that and don't allow the ego to get into what you're trying to do with your body and your breath. So, anxiety is not just in our minds, but we knew that. We've been talking about how it's in our bodies and how it feels uncomfortable and how we need to feel it in order to release it and let it move forward. And we've talked about using breath work before. We've talked about loving ourselves. And Dr. Russell was also saying these very same things. Healing anxiety is a journey, but you can make your way through anxiety, but you have to feel your way out of it. You can't think your way out of it. And if this episode or any of the episodes I do about any of the things, but anxiety in the last year, if these things are helpful to you, please share them with a friend, share them with a parent, share them with someone else who's also experiencing this so that they can get to know the things that you're learning about how to deal with anxiety or how to deal with your child who has anxiety. You're not alone. There are people everywhere that can help you, and I want to be one of those people. So if you are needing some extra support in the anxiety area, whether it's you that needs the support or your child needs the support, let me know. I would love to be able to help you. And I do anxiety audits that are free that you can just sign up for them, and we can talk about what's going on with your anxiety. And I will even give you a plan for what to do next, even if you don't become my client. So I just want to help people be able to manage their anxiety and know that there are other options out here besides suffering. So I hope to be able to talk to you and get to know you, and keep watching and sharing my podcast and YouTube channel with people so that they can get help too. I'll talk to you soon.